Hi there, I'm Chris McLaughlin. I've come from a company which is based in Sweden, but I live in Japan. And I've ended up with the last talk of the day, so I hope I can live up to the standard of all the other ones so far. My talk, very briefly, who am I? I just told you this. My talk is about working across time zones. I'm going to start with a little bit of an explanation of how I got into video games and how MinMod started, because it's all how my development story and MinMod's development story are kind of intertwined. So hopefully it will all make sense. The talk's called Good Evening, Good Morning, because I work in Japan, my coworkers work in Sweden, so all our meetings every day start with good morning and good evening because we're on the opposite sides of the world. Oh wow, there is no fonts on this picture. Oh, I did animations. Well, that's cool. So I studied video games at university in 2001. One of the first games courses, I think, in the world. My family were slightly suspicious, I think, that this was a real career, but it's worked out. As part of that, I did an internship in Japan, and that led to me working in Japan, moving to Japan. After university, I applied to pretty much every company I could find in Japan and to a bunch in the UK. I ended up working in Brighton, in the south of England. That was probably my first big move to the opposite end of the country. I worked at a company called Zoe Mode, and I was there for a while. It was a really great job to start off in. It was, I guess we would say, single A or double A company. We did a lot of small games and medium-sized games, a lot of music games. But it was really great because there was so many different projects that I could work on. I got a taste of all different styles of development. I had really good mentors. The company was big enough that there was people who could mentor me, but it was small enough that all my contributions were quite significant to the games. That ended with a good company experience of corporate restructuring, and I was made redundant. That led me to do some freelancing, which was great because I learned, it was hard, but I learned a lot about running my own business and all the kind of stuff which has served me as tech director at MinMod. After that, I worked at BIC. I've written on here, the games are 8.4 games, 2.1 games. It was 8 released games, and then 4 prototypes or unreleased games. And as I was working at all of these companies, I did a lot of prototyping, and I learned that that's what I really like doing. So while I was at BIC, the opportunity came to move to Japan. And you can see on the map now, there's a bunch of people here. These are all the folk I was working at, some of the people I was working with at Vitae. While I was there, I was doing a lot of prototyping. We made a VR game, which won an award at Bit Summit, which was pretty exciting. That led us to going to GDC, which I'd never been on a business trip like anything like that in my life. That was very, very exciting. I learned that going to video games events is amazing. So now I'm back here. That game didn't come out in the end, sadly. We then made another prototype for a game called Tiny Escape, which we brought to we brought to BIC in 2018, I think, and won the Excellence in Experimental, so thank you, BIC. After that, we went back to Japan. That game, sadly, again, didn't really go anywhere. We then made a bunch of B2B games for VR arcades, including one project, which was 2 games in 5 weeks, which was hard work. But at that time, the team was a little bit bigger, and I was learning a bit more management. So on those 2 games, I did not so much programming, but a lot more making sure they were getting done on time. Towards the end of my time in Japan, we started working on a game called Paper Valley. It's a VR paper plane throwing game. And this one did get released eventually. I think we finished that one in Japan, and then I had an opportunity to move back to Scotland. My family had an opportunity to move back to Scotland. So we took that, and that was the start of all our time zone adventures, I guess. Because at this point, I was in Scotland. We had some of the team in Japan. We had one of my other co-workers had moved to Sweden, and we were trying to develop this game across 8 or 9 hours of time zone. It was hard. Every morning, I'm trying to think which way around this is. Every morning, I would wake up and say good morning to the people in Japan who would say good evening. There's very little overlap. I think probably at this time we made a few mistakes and struggled to get the game, struggled to work well because this was the first time we'd ever worked with such huge difference in time. But the game came out and we made a port of the game for Oculus Go. And shortly after that, another co-workers moved to Sweden. And at this time, they were setting up Vitae Europe. So we were going to, the big plan, I guess, was to expand Vitae across the world. But let's see what happened here. But the problem was, what was the problem? The problem was it was hard to make VR video games. At this time, there was, I guess, a little bit of a dip in the appeal of VR. AR started to seem like the big thing with iOS's AR kit and things like that. So it was very hard for us to find solid work. We were doing a lot of contracts. We did some industry contracts, working on art projects. And that led us to look for some investment. We ended up, Alex, who moved to Sweden, he found a company called Beyond Frames who really liked our team and they wanted to invest in us, which was very, very unusual because we didn't have a game to sell them. It was just me and Alex and Therese who worked really well as a team together, and they saw something in that and they invested in us. But as part of that investment deal, we were no longer a Vitae company. Luckily, that I think went reasonably smoothly. The CEO of Vitae is still part owner of Moonmode. That's part of the reason we changed the name, is because it just keeps things cleaner that we are now a separate company. So this was all great, but the problem with working on different contracts meant that even though we were a really good team and we worked really well together, we were never actually working together. I would be doing one project, Alex was doing something else, Therese was doing something else. And this was frustrating, but with the investment, that meant we could set aside some time to try and work out how can we bring ourselves and work together again. Let's see, it's not there. So what we did is I flew over to Sweden. We had a few days at what we call Moonmode Summit. Came up with I guess part of a business plan for what we wanted to do for the future, and to come up with a solid pitch for a game. Luckily, we came up with a solid pitch. We managed to find funding to make that game. That game was Space Folk City. It's a VR city building game. And that was great. Everything was fine. We're going to make a video game. We're all going to be quite close together, working on the same thing. That's amazing. And then I had an opportunity to move back to Japan just at the start of this project, and so I did. Also during the middle of the pandemic, and so I moved to Japan, and there was a lot of troubles. I got COVID on the way there, and then my family got COVID one after each other. So there was about a month of not really being able to work, not really being able to do much, trying to get a new game off the ground, finishing off our contract work, all whilst very, very far away from the people I wanted to work with. So with Space Folk City, the rest of the talk, I guess, comes a lot from this. We ended up working with people all over the world, pretty much all the way around. There's a bit, no, you can't, I'm not pointing at the right thing. And I think we learned a lot from what we had been doing, but working with these other collaborators sort of cemented, I think, some of the ideas and processes we had that we were maybe doing the right thing. And then the future of Moon Mode is hopefully everything's going to continue going well, because it has so far. Fingers crossed. Okay, so now I guess the interesting bit of the talk is how do we manage to make video games without spending much time talking to each other? How do we manage to create anything when we can't really hang out? I've written at the bottom here, communication is the most important thing. I realized as I was practicing this afternoon, actually, this talk is basically all just about communication in the different ways that you can and perhaps should do it, or the ways that work for us. Pretty much every problem, 90% of the problems that we have had come from a lack of communication, someone forgetting to tell someone something, someone misunderstanding, or things like that, and it's just that's what causes, I think, everything. I think a lot of the problems as well come from when we think that we've explained our problem, or we explained our work very well, and the person who we're talking to thinks that they have understood us well, but that's not the case at all. There have definitely been situations where the three of us are all talking and discussing Spacefolk City and some problem, and then maybe a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks later, when it comes to implementation, we discover that we're all making slightly different games to each other. And that happens, that does happen, it still happens a lot. So this is why I think it's really important to just talk to each other and make sure that you have been understood. It's difficult. I'm not a huge fan of meetings, especially when they're over video calls or whatever. But you kind of just have to do it. And a lot of what I've discovered recently is that the communication is the work. I'm a programmer. I like just sitting down at my computer and tapping away and getting stuff done. And to me, that's my job. That's my work. But it's taken me a while to realize that that's only a really small part of what I should be doing. A lot of my job is talking to the rest of the team and making sure that they know what's happening. And I think for me, that was quite a big moment in my head. It's it's okay for me to spend an hour or 2 hours typing out messages and writing up documents and making sure that I'm getting my point across, even though it doesn't feel like real work to me because I'm not creating a game. I'm not physically making the day-to-day or the moment-to-moment part of the game. It's still, this is making the game. The last point, which I've not got a bullet point here, is that we do all our communication. Most of our communication is asynchronous. We have about 1 hour of overlap per day to do a meeting, but we've never tried to offset our work hours. So I don't work European hours and they don't work Japanese hours, because none of us wants to get up in the middle of the night or stay up super late. I don't think that can work. Maybe if you've got some super deadline, you could do 1 day or 2 days of let's offset our hours so we're working on the exact same thing. But the mental and health effects of staying at the wrong times is definitely not worth it. So everybody does real-time chat nowadays. When I was at Vitae, we didn't have anything. We even had an IRC server at one point, and nobody used it. But now we use Discord. We used to use Slack. Doesn't really matter, I think. Most of these slides actually are the actual thing you use doesn't matter, just as long as you work with them well. The thing with real-time text communication, chat. I don't know why I didn't call this slide just chat. I think it's important to mentally keep it as chat, and the things that you put in Discord or Slack or Zulip or whatever you use, you should try to manage them as if I was in an office and I just turned around to someone and chat. That's the kind of stuff that should be in here. They all have search and they sell themselves as this is where all your information should be. But we found it's really difficult to pull that information out later on, especially months later. So try not to put that sort of stuff in there. The big one, I think, which I've never seen in any, I've seen a lot of remote talks or talks about managing remote work recently, or since the pandemic started. But I've never seen anyone mention that they use an internet forum for working remotely. But for us, it's super important because the chat is kind of real time. It has to be real time. I'm chatting back and forth with you. But with the forum, I can get up in the morning and I can look and see any important information that's happened overnight and respond to it there. And so the asynchronous thing is really nice about the forum. But more than that, it's organized by default. You can't just like type something in and then forget about it. You have to think, where does this belong? What category does it go in? How should it be tagged? And like I was saying earlier, that feels like a lot of not work. It makes you really sit down and like, is this worth typing out? And almost always, yes, it is worth typing out, and it's worth going through that pain of like, oh, I've got to do this properly because I'm typing on the forum. But by doing that, you get much better topics. You have much clearer thoughts. You still can type like super short messages and fire them in there. But in general, we find that the content on the forum is like much more useful long term. We use it kind of for all of our archived useful information. So like, how do I set up Steam? How do I upload a build to the Oculus Store? That stuff's in there. I guess you could also put these things in like Google Docs or some shared thing. But that seems like another step for a different type of work. Whereas the forum, this is kind of like the important meetings we'd be having around the conference table, if we had a conference table. The difficult thing with it is that sometimes it's hard to work out, is this important enough to like ascend to the forum? Should it belong just in chat? Because it's not that important, but it might be one day. Almost always, just put it in the forum. If no one ever looks at it, never mind. But for that one time when you do need it 3 years down the line and you can't remember why this thing is set up in this exact way, it will be there. Yeah, so get forum. That's important. Another thing which we do is we try to do a post-mortem after every project. It's kind of fun to do. And it's at this point you discover, again, quite often it's like a lot of the problems that we find in the post-mortems are, I didn't understand what this person meant. This person did this and then said this. It's just like, here's a list of the breakdowns in communications throughout the project. The way we do it, I guess there's different ways we do it, is we all go off by ourselves and we write down the good things and the bad things, and then we come together and go through the list, see who's got the same thoughts. Those ones we sort of put to the top of the list. But the most important part, I think, of the postmortems is the summary, which we will do at the end and we will put on the forum. And we try to break it down into two sections and condense the points that we have into maybe 5 or 10 points. And we try to keep them positive actions. We have one section which is like, keep doing these things, like all the things that we think went really well and are transferable to other projects. And a section on improve these things. Section on things that didn't go so well, but we know we can do better. I think it's important not to have, this was a bad thing, don't do this. This guy sucks. That doesn't help make things better. And as well, I think it's important to have this visible somewhere. Previously, when we were in an office, it was stuck on the back of the door for one project. But having it archived in the forum where you can go and see it is the next best thing, I think. Yeah, and I just think it's good for maintaining. I don't even know what the right word is. A through line of all your projects together, and you can see how you're improving. process of how you make the video game or whatever project you're working on. We've used a lot of different project management tools. We still never found the one that's perfect for us. We've used Jira and Trello and Codex, Todoist, and we always find something's not quite right. Currently we use GitLab, and it's fine. But again, like I don't think it really matters as long as you have a tool to use and everybody uses it in kind of the same way, and everybody understands what that way is. That's much better than like having the exact perfect tool. So when I speak about process, I just mean like how do you, I guess, decide on what tasks you're doing? How do you measure the tasks that you're doing, and how do you finish a task? Currently, we use a kind of combination mixture of Kanban and Scrum, and depending on which part of the project, it changes. I think that's another thing that's really important for everyone to understand and be able to do, is that the process is and should be flexible, because sticking too solidly to like this is how we do Scrum and we're doing it exactly like this for the whole project, it's going to kind of cause problems when that part of the project isn't like perfectly measured. If you're prototyping, it's maybe harder to say this is going to take 2 weeks. So I can't say this is the process that you should use, but as long as everybody understands it and can work within it and work with each other, and everyone understands everyone's limitations, I guess, within that. I'm still learning, many years later, but I'm still learning that, hey, I should always put a bug. If I find a bug, it should definitely go in the issues tracker, or I should move it from this has to be done to I am doing this, because if I don't, nobody will know what's going on. And I think, again, this is something that I'm learning, try to improve. Having this is the work that's being worked on, like column or spreadsheet or whatever, doesn't matter. It's really important when you don't speak to each other every day. It's really good to have that visible and to be able to see, well, I know that I'm waiting on, say, Therese to finish this work, and I'm waiting for Alex to do this piece of audio, instead of just being like, well, what am I going to do? I can't do anything because I don't know where in the process each of these tasks are. So I guess the self-discipline to keep these things up to date is important, and it's hard. Again, as a programmer, I don't like doing the stuff that's not work, but it is work. So contractors and collaborators, part of working with other people, I think, is getting them to buy into your process and your, I won't say rules, but not rules, the way you work. We're only 3 people, so for Spacefolk City and pretty much every other project we worked on, we hire in contractors or outside teams to help us, and part of that is getting them in, making sure they understand the process, making sure they understand that this is where the merge requests happen, this is why you would do this thing, make sure you update your tickets or whatever. And for getting people, I guess this applies to everything, but for a distributed team, I think getting these people to buy into the whole project. So I've written collaborators here because I much prefer to think of the people that we work with as collaborators than contractors, because I want them to be part of their game. Their ideas make our game, and the game wouldn't get made without them. So they're as important as everything else. And maybe it's only like a semantic difference, but to me it's important that I feel that for the duration of this, we're all working together instead of we're working and they're coming in and sorting out my problems. In terms of the time zone thing, I think it's important that you try to keep those people within your bounds. So we've got people in Europe and people in Japan. Ideally, we hire people like in between those 2 places. We did have a person on the slide, we had a couple of people in America, and that worked because we'd worked with one of them before, and he was really good. We could just trust that he would get everything done. But if there were problems, it's basically like a 24-hour loop of giving feedback, waiting for that feedback, or waiting for the changes, seeing how it is, and giving more feedback. And it's possible, but it's much harder when you don't know the person so well. And if you've just hired someone on, ideally get someone in your time zone. And again, partly that maybe we're a small team, so if there are issues, we can't be around to mentor without that big loop. And when you're trying to help someone out, it's much better to be able to say, do this, do that, do this, you did that, thanks, great. Yeah, the other thing that we have used, which is not collaboration, but it's not in the same way, is for the stuff that we cannot do, and we don't believe, we don't believe in ourselves, but we know our limits. So for like stuff like marketing and PR, that's stuff that we basically outsource to other companies. We work closely with them, but it's nice to be able to kind of fire and forget and just say, please, can you do this? And when you find a company that can do that for you, kind of doesn't matter where they are in the world, if they're good. Yeah, that's just a very short slide, I guess. One of the last things is having the self-discipline and the trust in the rest of your team to do what they will say they will do. And I don't really know how to get this. With the three of us, we've been working together for a long time, so we all know what we can do and what we cannot do. Alex and Therese know that I probably haven't updated the work that I'm doing, but they can trust that I am doing it, usually. And I know that if I say to Alex or Therese, can you get this done? And I go to sleep, I'll wake up in the morning and it will just be done. I think that this comes back to the collaborative thing, is that until you have that trust with people, work with people close to your time zone. And that's the best advice, is like work with people till you can trust them, and then that's great, and you have a wonderful team. This slide again, communication. It's here because it's so important. Again, I realized that this is the whole talk, but make sure that you understand what you're communicating, and you understand that what you have communicated has been understood. I think that's probably my whole talk compressed down, is just make sure everybody understands. And that's it. I've got be open to opportunities here because I moved all around the world and it's worked out pretty well. And communicate. The very last thing, this was not the case when I applied to do the talk, but we are looking for programmers and level designer and project manager. So if you're excited to work across huge big time zones, please get in contact. Thank you.